I've mentioned a few times in these videos that another nerdy passion of mine is comics. And as you might expect from someone weird enough to do a 1041 episode long chronology of a system that they never even had while they were young, I really enjoyed delving into the history of the medium. In fact, a year before Famidaily, I recorded about half a dozen episodes of a podcast about the history of the Marvel Universe. So this is a really long way of saying, I love Little Nemo, and I cut the background portion of this episode way back. Little Nemo in Slumberland was comics' first masterpiece. Every Sunday, a full page would be taken up by the journeys of a little boy through his dreams. It was the work of Winsor McCay, not the first person to grasp how to combine still images with a passage of time, but the first person to do it right. And that extends beyond comics. He was a pioneer of animation as well. 80 years after his comic, Toho decided to turn it into an animated film. And the strange thing is, rather than do it themselves, they made it a US co-production, and the talent that the US side brought in is stacked. Script by Christopher Columbus, who would go on to make Home Alone and some films about a boy wizard. Story by Ray Bradbury, the guy who wrote that story you read in school about the kid who got locked in the closet on the one day when there would be sun. Visual designs by Jean Mobius Giraud, one of the greatest illustrators of the 20th century. The film had some amazing talent behind it. It bombed pretty hard. But Capcom had the rights to make a game based on it. And so a year and a half after the film's release in Japan, and a year and a half before the film's release in the United States, Capcom put out Nemo Pajama Hero, or Pajama Hero Nero. Nobody's really sure what the actual title is because they printed the two lines on top of each other. I've seen it written both ways. I want to talk briefly about the box before I get any further. The box for the US version is clearly inspired by Winsor McCay's drawings. The Japanese box seems to be a reference to Galaxy Express 39s. I think it's because the association of a little boy on a journey through dreamlike adventures. It's a strange choice, even if there is a train stage in the game. There's also a train stage in the arcade game that Capcom released almost simultaneously, but the arcade Nemo is a totally different game from the Famicom game. The plot of the Famicom game is that Slumberland is under threat by the King of Nightmares, and since it's Nemo's dream, he gets to be the hero. The game is an exploration platformer. You have to locate a certain number of keys on each stage to go out the exit door. Nemo himself is weak and can't really get around very well. The A button jumps for him, but the B button throws candy. If candy hits an enemy, it's stunned for a few moments, but if candy feeds one of the friendlier animals that are wandering around, then it will fall asleep, and Nemo can join with it in some way to gain new abilities. Now, just because the animals will be friendly after you've fed them candy doesn't mean they're friendly immediately. Touching them without feeding them first will still damage you, and it takes a couple seconds after you've fed them the last piece before they fall asleep. For the first 7 stages, joining with an animal like this is the only way to get an ability that will let you attack, and not every single animal that you ally with can do damage. After the 7th stage, you gain a magic rod that can shoot a charged attack at enemies, and Nemo can switch between using it or candy by pressing select. Pressing select is also how you exit from an animal that you're currently riding with. Something to keep an eye on with animals is that they sometimes have health bars that are longer than yours. You don't gain health to fill it up when you join with an animal, and if you have more than Nemo's usual 3 bars when you exit, then you lose the excess health. So let's break down the animals that you can team up with. Getting in the frog will let you jump super high, and you can jump on enemies to destroy them. The mole will let you tunnel through soft earth in some areas. Something to keep an eye out for as you use it for the first time is this place where you can go down further than the screen. Nemo's a little bit inconsistent about how you can go off the bottom of some areas and others you can't. Sometimes there's a helpful visual cue, and sometimes there isn't. The mole can't jump, nor can it attack, but you can dig up. Similarly, the purple lizard can't attack anything, but it can stick to walls and climb up them. The climbing mechanic can be a little bit awkward. Basically, if you jump, you'll stick, but if you walk, you'll pass through. The lizard can also fit into small places. The gorilla can also climb, but it can punch too. The bee will let you fly upward for short periods. You can fire its stinger while you're in the air. The only thing you can do with the fish is move freely in the water. Other things that can swim, like Nemo himself or the frog, bob up to the surface. Finally, the hermit crab can snip at things, but more importantly, when it jumps it will turn upside down and can burrow into soft soil. Then you can push in a direction and hit the jump button again to tunnel short distances. Besides the keys that you have to pick up, you can find bottles of medicine that will restore 1 point of health, or first aid kits that will restore you to full. I like Nemo a lot, and I'll get into that, but there's some glaring problems that I do have to talk about. First, the key hunt is not fun. In most cases, you have to collect every single key on the stage, and these stages can be pretty sprawling. If you didn't check every single part of every single stage, you're going to get to that exit door and have to backtrack. The search for the keys often requires that you go into hidden areas as well. There's a fair amount of, well, how was I supposed to know that was there, that occurs in this game. Second, a lot of times you are not going to be very maneuverable. A lot of the animals have very poor jumps, including Nemo himself, that make it difficult to avoid enemies. And a lot of the enemies home in on you, moving around you until they lock on and then coming straight at you. For example, here as you're climbing this tree, the dandelion seeds will knock you off if you try to climb up. What you have to do is jump up to intentionally spawn them, wait for it to lock onto you and start dropping straight down, then jump onto the tree and climb up. And that's far from the only place where something like that happens. This is one of those games where enemies spawn when you reach certain points on the screen, and so even if you manage to avoid them, they tend to keep coming. There's one special trick at your disposal. You can get a slightly higher jump by pressing up and then hitting jump, but I've always found that it behaves a bit inconsistently. Most of the time, jumping over enemies is very tight. The constant flow of enemies that are very difficult to avoid makes Nemo a surprisingly difficult game. At least they give you infinite continues. There's also a level select code. You enter this on the title screen, and then every time you hit A, you'll advance one stage. From what I could tell, Nemo Pajama Hero is pretty well regarded in Japan. It's not enormously popular, but it's considered one of the Famicom's hidden gems. Personally, I don't think it's that hidden. I think Nemo Pajama Hero looks fantastic. I love the animal abilities. And I actually really like a lot of the level design, even if that train stage is a nightmare. Nemo is a pretty good game that mainly suffers from some really absurd difficulty and how the key hunt isn't well implemented. It's a challenge, but it's one that I enjoy taking on.